Apologies. Hi, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of Disruption Talks. Today, I will forego the usual long introduction to the industry or anything concerning the topic that we would be discussing because it's a topic that deserves diving right in. I will begin with 3 points of statistics that we will structure our conversation around. So, number one, depression alone, just in the US, costs the nation $210 billion annually. Half of all lifetime mental illnesses begins by age of 14, and 75% of them begin by 24. So in a very important age when it comes to developing your career and becoming the adult version of yourself. And the third and the last one is the average delay between onset of mental illness symptoms and treatment is 11 years. So in times like these where our humanity is flipped upside down, there's no better time to focus on prevention of what? Of mental health, because that's the topic of today. And joining us is Anneli Bartholdy of Simply Broken. Hi, Anneli.
Hey, Philip.
How are you?
Good, thanks. Thanks for inviting me on today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Where are you checking in from? Is it Denmark or?
Yeah, Copenhagen, Denmark. You can see how dark it is.
Well, full lights also in Poland. We're minus 20 degrees and minus 20 amount of sun. So let's dive right in. I think we should begin with you telling us what Simply Broken is. But afterwards, we would love to hear what is your personal why. Because as far as I know, you decided to leave banking to move into Simply Broken, right? So if you could tell us.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Anneli. I'm the founder of Simply Broken, as Philip says. We're a mental health tech startup that's trying to make it easy for people to get instant access to mental health resources and support without having to go through a lot of searching or difficulty for themselves. And we're trying to use technology as an enabler where the gaps are in for people right now to get access to help, whether they know what they need help with or not. That's another point I'm sure we'll discuss during today. It just needs to be easy for people. Those of you watching, if you've had any struggles with mental health yourself, you'll know that when you're struggling, you don't have the capacity to look for a lot of things, analyze, make difficult decisions. We want to take that problem away so that people can just understand themselves and get access to help.
Okay, so that's pretty much what was so tempting in the mental health space to address that abundance of choice, pretty much, right? So maybe if you could tell us a quick review of the recent years, because I recall when mental health went through the phase of it's not something we talk about, it's something we start talking about, and then every second ad on Instagram is for the app Calm or something else. It's teach me meditation or help me get through my day in terms of mental health. So could you tell us about the landscape of mental health, digital mental health? Actually?
Yeah, so as you describe it very accurately, it's been through a very rapid but good transition, I would say, in that it wasn't long ago, and there are still many places where it's taboo to talk about mental health, both culturally, but also there's a gender difference as well between men and women in the ability to openly talk about and get support for mental health. We're in a better place now in a lot of places in the world about that it's less taboo. You can now say when you're struggling, and people don't judge you based on that in the same way that they used to. What especially COVID has helped and hurt with is that now people are scrambling to get virtual distance online support. Mental health is one of many areas for that. What it's created is a new problem, though, and that's where we kind of started with Simply Broken, was that as of May of last year, the American Psychological Association estimated that there were 20,000 apps on the app stores targeting mental health. And you'd think that's a good thing because, you know, that means there's tons of help out there. But there's such limited capability for search and refined search. Less than 28% of the apps have any kind of clinical validation or documentation behind them. There's a lot of shady practices around data privacy and users' data and data policy. So it's, although good in the sense that there's abundance of solutions, which ones are actually trustworthy and helpful is very intransparent. So that's one of the key problems we're and many other companies are trying to tackle right now.
I need to make a personal note. Selfishly, as a male, I am very grateful for you pointing out the gender difference, because the stats, as we know it, for mental health, depression, or even suicide rates, they're just atrocious for men, young boys especially, right? So I appreciate the fact that you pointed that out. However, so when you're saying that there's an abundance or overabundance, we've got 20,000 apps, 30% of them only clinically semi-validated, if at all. So 20,000 apps from 3,000 apps tells me that there's an interest in that space. And when people are interested in a specific space, especially digitally, it's pretty much always out to make money. Of course, they're trying to solve a problem, but if you see the jump from 3,000 to 20,000, there's a bunch of people who think I can make bank in this space, right? So if you could tell me, when it comes to venture capital or any investment of sorts, what's your perception of the focus and the interest from the people who have the money and want to invest it and see a return over time?
Yeah, well, if I will answer your question, but I actually want to go back to the kind of premise you said. A lot of the apps that are coming are user driven in the sense that it's actually a lot of people who've experienced or are experiencing mental health challenges themselves were looking for help and didn't see that there was a tool they were able to get access to.
Okay.
It's not that you're wrong in that a lot of people see this as a really good space to make money. Investment is growing in this area everywhere around the world, especially the US and China are dominating in that investment space. But there's also a lot of red flags going up because it's so quick and easy for someone to create the next mental health app. You have so many tools online now that anyone with some basic, even no code skills can put something out there. And I like to believe in the best of people and do talk to many people frequently who say, well, I was suicidal 3 years ago, and now I want to give that back and make help more available to people because I didn't have what I needed at that time. And that's really good intentions. But the problem is that a lot of those people, the reason they create something new is, again, this issue of not being able to find good tools, and they may be out there. There's also an interesting correlation that some studies have found that the more validated or better kind of researched, quality studied solutions are usually quite poor in the user experience and kind of ease of use, whereas the ones that are really slick, really nice, people love the interface, they get really high ratings, but they often are very kind of shallow in the amount of research behind them and how much difference they actually make over time. So we see this, unfortunately, the more researched ones, more academic maybe, are often missing kind of the business side, as you say, the investment and the more business mindset, whereas the business people know that you can make good business on this. Like you mentioned, Calm, Headspace has gone into a partnership this year where they're now an add-on feature into Microsoft Teams where you can do mindfulness within Teams or little breaks and things, which is great. So it's not wrong, but there was something like, I think, 5% of all the apps on the app stores related to mental health had more than 100,000 users or something like that. All of the rest are fighting for like these 5 users, 50 users, 300 users. And it's really, yeah, complex right now to figure out how to get these quality solutions higher up, but also connect them to the business world. Back to your point about investment. How do we get investment to root towards them, see the shortcomings, and then maybe put investment and other resources into it so that it can get elevated in the right way?
So we've spoken about the popularity in general. We've spoken about the interest of the people who want to fund this stuff. And now when it comes to interest from policymakers, what's your take on that? Has it matched the interest from people in general and the interest of investors? Do you see that governments are trying to figure out that, hey, maybe we just could avoid the next opioid crisis, or maybe we could lower our spending on healthcare and have a happier society? Does that stay in parallel with what's been going on everywhere else in the world, or what do you think?
I don't think it's been on par. I think there's a better awareness, and thank goodness, I'll be the only person you'll ever hear this, but thank goodness COVID came, because it's forced a lot of policymakers to accept the validity of virtual services and virtual and digital support tools. What we see at Simply Broken is that most of the focus right now is essentially replicating the clinical support. So if you're mentally ill, if you have a diagnosis or a referral for treatment, then that's the focus right now from a standpoint of being able to provide virtual services, tracking between the therapist and the patient. But back to your point about prevention, there's 90% of the other people looking into mental health applications and using mental health apps who statistically aren't mentally ill or aren't diagnosed. They are somewhere on the rest of the spectrum that they're just challenged, and it could either get better, it could get worse, and it's the ideal point of time to make an intervention, but there's very little, in my opinion, policy movements into that space.
Thank you for making that division between the two groups of users for such apps, because essentially you've got the people who are trying to solve a problem that they have or prevent a problem that they don't yet have. So I already see a very nice question in the comments that will lead up to this, but your building of this division was very helpful. So we'll come back to that in a moment. And we've spoken about the things that have been doing well. You also mentioned that, of course, the abundance is the problem. Have there been any other problems over the past years? Whilst investment interest is growing, we've got policymakers also showing more interest. Is there anything that actually has deteriorated over the past years outside of the abundance that we've mentioned?
Unfortunately, mental health has deteriorated, so we see the problem growing. So as we mentioned, I'm living here in Denmark. Great health system, both mental health and physical health. You also see in the UK, they have quite good coverage, but even in the countries with the best health services and support, there's a wait time of 3 to 6 months before you actually get access to a treatment provider. And then there's the challenge that the type of support people are rooted to is not personalized. Like if you have to wait 3 to 6 months, you get the first available therapist, for example. And they're a great professional. It's not about skill, but sometimes you just don't have the right chemistry. Then that person either loses faith in the treatment and thinks therapy won't work for them, or they want to find someone new, but they can't because there's such a backlog. So they have to kind of take what they get. And a huge issue you see across the world is people falling out of the treatment system. So they try and something doesn't work for them. And I mean, that's something that's just been growing by nature of the need growing. But this is all issues that were growing before even COVID-19 hit. But now there's studies out of the UK that 1 in 5 people who've been diagnosed with COVID are also experiencing either insomnia, anxiety, or depression as a consequence of the illness. So the numbers are just exploding. The other thing you see right now, which we're struggling a bit with back to the investment side, is that a lot of investment is growing in mental health, but they're consolidating and pooling their bets in fewer number of companies and in later stages. So it's actually quite hard now as an early company without a lot of traction and validation up front to get interest, because a lot of companies can see that investment companies see they can milk the Calms, the Headspaces that are out there. And not that they don't deserve the investment, of course not, but the level of entry barrier to investment in mental health has gone up significantly.
That leads us very nicely into the next section, which is major trends expected in 2021. And you've slightly touched upon this, but I think it would be good to hear it in a slightly expanded fashion. Dominant mental health issues. If you could tell us on a global level, but also bring it down to our area, so Europe, and perhaps also the States. I'm just saying that I imagine that there might be slightly different aspects of what issues are dominant in our area of Europe and whether that differs in terms of the States and the globe, so to say.
So you mean like what people are actually struggling with most?
Absolutely. I imagine that anxiety holds the crown, but I'm pretty sure that there are other things with even larger severity on day-to-day life, satisfaction, quality.
Yeah, so anxiety and depression are usually the first two that come up. Stress usually falls in once you start to look at working age individuals as well. And that is fairly universal. So pre-COVID numbers were that 300 million people are suffering with depression at any given moment, at any given day. Um, and it's the leading cause of disability worldwide is depression. But there are regions of the world where you see more severe challenges where it often leads to higher numbers in suicide rates, for example. If you back to your point about the US, one risk we have right now, given COVID and the high rate of unemployment, is that there's a connection, especially in Western culture, relating to level of unemployment and the amount of suicide rates there are. Um, we don't see anything super significant different like across the world, you could say, between, for example, here in Europe, US, and even in Asia. But one key gap we have is that we only have statistics based right now on, for the most part, either academic research or clinical registration. So unless I'm diagnosed by my doctor here in Denmark, there is no official registration that knows what I'm struggling with. And we know in North America, and especially the US, that there's a lot less social systems for mental health. It's privatized, and a lot of people do go for help, but you don't know what people struggle with if they're not in the system. And that's where solutions like Lyra Health, which is in the US, Unmind in the UK, things like ourselves who are trying to track people's mental health challenges before they're at a point of being diagnosed with something. We want to work with and are talking to nonprofit government organizations now to actually give them access to that kind of statistical data so that they're able to get an understanding of what is it people actually struggle with. When we first launched in December, so very recently, one of the first major things people were reporting that we weren't expecting at all was anger problems. We hadn't seen that coming. We were thinking, okay, it'll be anxiety, it'll be stress, maybe sleep problems. And those are there, they're on the board, but anger was the third most reported issue for the first couple of weeks. And I mean, it wasn't a representative user base of a global pool, but it was just interesting that so many had reported it that it came up in that way. So the good thing about this trend, even if the abundance is a bit noise, is that there is a lot more data being gathered. So as long as people are doing really good, trustworthy data practices and being responsible with that data, governments and research institutions are going to have access to a lot better information and will be able to see what is it that people are actually struggling most with so that funds can be allocated appropriately.
So when it comes to fund allocation, one very important area in which we all happen to be for at least 8 hours a day, if we're lucky with no overtime, is the corporate world. And when it comes to the corporate world, I think there is a big responsibility on the shoulders of the places that we work at. So small, medium, but especially large enterprises. I think they have a commitment both to the society as much as to their workers, and those things seem to intersect. So what would you say about the transition from human resource management to human asset management? Because I believe that this is how we should be looking at people, not as a resource that can be depleted and reduced if it's redundant, but actually something that can be invested in and can be bringing significant returns if you take care of it, the asset, which here is human.
Exactly. Now you said it exactly right. So that's something that we are also really focused on, is transitioning this even discussion and kind of mentality towards employees in a workplace, that if you invest in them, you're investing in your company. And I know a lot of people watching probably feel like this is common knowledge. Maybe their company feels really good and supported in that way, but you'd be surprised how often you hear from leaders or team leads or management that they believe in these, but they actually don't have the skills or any support from the company on what to do if someone is struggling. In the best cases, most companies that you see right now have some kind of reactive approach, some kind of reactive policy if someone experiences stress, or right now, if they're experiencing loss from their family, do they get extra paid time and access to therapy or things like that? That a lot of companies are starting to look at putting those sorts of things in place, but it's not standard yet. But when we're talking about proactive, we still have this challenge that it's not consistent, that the company knows in advance when someone's struggling. In some cases, the policies from HR are oriented towards administration and managing the employees, not supporting them, which means that the employees don't feel safe telling their company that something's wrong because they're afraid it will impact their whether they keep a job or get a promotion or something else. It's really dependent on the management themselves and then also the policies in place from the company. But it's the way we're going to just have to go. And I had one interesting conversation with a team responsible for their employee safety in general, mental, physical. And we talked about this idea of the individual kind of tracking and getting insight over time about their mental health. And their point of reference was an employee engagement software that the company asked the employee, how connected are you to the company? Do you feel empowered in your role? Things like that. And they really struggled to get employee engagement. So even though the point was to engage the employees, a lot of employees didn't respond or act on it. And they're asking, well, I was actually asked, how do we force people to track their mental health? And that's the wrong attitude, because this isn't about you as a company. You don't force your employees. You need to give them value and empower them in what they need. And a byproduct of that could be that you get useful information. But the employee has to feel that it's about them first and not about the company trying to analyze for itself and make other decisions that you aren't trusting are in your best interest.
So let's take the next step and let's put this imaginary scenario to play. We currently have 10,000 listeners, and by tomorrow, all of the HR directors, anybody in management who's a decision maker, will be able to hear your call to action. What is it that companies should start doing and stop doing to actually? What would be the blueprint? What would you recommend as a rule of thumb that would work in most enterprises in terms of what should they stop doing and what should they start doing to address everything that we're talking about?
Yeah. Oof, I mean, that's a big question, and I don't have like the perfect blueprint drawn up. The key thing is that what companies need or seem to be benefiting the most from is insight into their employees, right? Whether it's mental health related or other, how are the employees performing? How are they feeling? Do they have what they need? Do we have the employees we need? All that. Companies thrive if they can use this kind of information. But then they need to realize that you can't use inside out thinking on this. When it comes to employees, they're paid to be there. Often they are passionate about you as a company and the role they do. It's not that they don't care, but they're not there for you. They are there for a job. And so you need to make sure that you think from their perspective. So whatever you're doing, make it about them. Add value to them first. And then if you've done it intelligently, you can get aggregated, anonymized data still from the users, but you don't need to pinpoint each individual person. And that way they can trust you that you'll get information about them, but you'll use it in a healthy way that still started from a point of making their lives better, and it's easier for them to engage in their work. So from my perspective, it's about letting go of some of the classic management in a control perspective and instead empowering the individual and then benefiting from the insight you get from that perspective.
All right. So who should be driving this change? Is it employees bottom up? Is it C-level who should be taking a magnanimous stand and make a big gesture of actually addressing that, or mostly HR? Who actually is the owner of the topic, in your opinion?
That's a tough one. I would have to say it should be leadership and decision makers. It doesn't have to necessarily be the top, but it has to be people with influence. What we see, there's some interesting companies like you can look into, for example, Trifork, who don't have an HR department in the classic way other companies have. And they've put the responsibility of what would classically maybe be an HR role in the hands of the department or company organization heads. So they're responsible for making sure they have the right people, that the people are happy, that they stay, the whole thing. And I think that that makes the most sense because they're the ones with the best sight of who their people are, and people are different, so people's needs are different. So you can't just have one system that comes in, solves everyone's problems, and it's just done. You need to take the personal approach. But I think one reason we see the shift, luckily now, and why it's been a bit slow to happen, is that it's very uncomfortable for a lot of leadership people to not feel in control, to not be able to make their employees feel better. So what if you have an employee who comes to you and isn't feeling well, and you don't know how to help them and you're not trained in it? That's really uncomfortable. Isn't it better that there's a system the employee can go to so we don't have to deal with it? But I think everyone owns it, and not that you have to solve other people's problem, but you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable with your employee, and then you can work together to figure out what is the right thing.
So if we were to draw the blueprint, I think we can right now after your answer. So put yourself in their shoes, but also make sure that, especially if you're C-level, you're empowering everybody whose obligation it is to look after the mental health of others with the right tools. So first, you should educate the people how to look out for it and how to help when they spot a problem so they don't find themselves in a situation that you just mentioned. And actually, I would like us to go to some of the questions that we had here. Victor is asking the first one, and it's coming back to this divide that we drew a moment ago between the people who are using it as a band-aid for what's going on, or people who are using it just like we use fitness to avoid illness in the future. So how do I know if I have a problem with my mental health? How do I validate or qualify this with myself? What's the division between having a bad day or a streak of bad days and identifying something that I no longer can walk? This is a broken bone and it's time to face it. I need to see someone.
That's a really good question. And it also goes back to what you were saying at the beginning, Philip, about the amount of time that goes from when people first experience mental health challenges to actually going into treatment can be many years. So the thing is that if you're feeling fine, you're feeling okay, then you're probably not mentally ill. But some studies show that 90% of people experience some challenge to their mental health every day. The thing is that that doesn't necessarily mean you need to do something serious about it either. Some people, it's risky to say mental health because some people can then start to panic, oh, there's something wrong with me. And that doesn't help. That puts more pressure on. It's really about being observant of yourself. The more you can kind of be aware of yourself. And if you've ever had the feeling, I'm always really awkward or feeling really down and unenergetic, and I see this difference between myself and other people, and you think about, like, why am I always like this? Then you may actually want to raise the question, because it's probably, like, if you're most healthy people, and I don't mean healthy people in the sense that you have no mental health challenge, but you can still be healthy with mental health challenges. It's this whole experience between the difference between being kind of you and there being something off about you. What's dangerous, as you were saying, Philip, at the start, about people who are even 14 years old experiencing this, a lot of this hits around post-puberty time. And if your entire adult life you felt a certain way, you may not know that you need to do anything. One good friend of mine, he actually told me that story, that it wasn't until he was working and a manager at his work advised him to go talk to a psychologist, that he'd learned that he'd had anxiety disorder for 15 years. And then he tried some medication. In his case, that actually helped him a lot. And now he's been on medication for 20 years after that, and can just feel night and day difference, and not realizing that it wasn't him. He wasn't just that kind of person who always felt kind of down. It was actually this other reaction he was having that he couldn't control. So the key is to really, that is a tough one, because I mean, that's just you forming who you are and then thinking it's normal over a long time. But it always helps to talk to someone else and be like, hey, when this happens, I feel this way, or I can't handle those things, or this is the reaction I'm having. And ask, like, do you have that too? And it's not good or bad if you have the same or different, but you can get a sense more or less if kind of your reaction is off from what a group of other people are. Then maybe it's something worth exploring a bit more.
So the two learning points I'm hearing here is, first of all, it's not binary, it's not black and white. It's not that you're either healthy or you have challenges. I'm pretty sure that 90% of us, if not more, have a small, even if the smallest, but still a degree of something that challenged our mental health, either at the beginning of our lives or right now in the adult life. So another question that I have here is coming back to this paralysis analysis of 20,000 apps and more. Tomas asks, the market for mental health apps is getting crowded every week, just like we said. If I am a person who wants to find that right tool for myself, do I go for the most popular ones? How do I identify that this is the right thing for me? Is there advice that we can give there, or is that just...
Well, that's a good question. That's exactly the problem we're trying to work with at Simply Broken, right? So you know what's wrong with you, then we'll match you to things that you can trust. There are other companies now and governments that are supporting them, like orca.co.uk out of England. Their entire company is going through the app stores on all types of health, not just mental health, and then they score them. So based on clinical validation, user experience, and then data privacy policies. And that's one of our key kind of go-to sources as well. But it is more clinically oriented. So a lot of governments and public health organizations are starting to look to them as a source. So there are people who are spending that time. But unfortunately, for Thomas's question, it's a little bit of a minefield. So there was some studies that came out from Accenture, I believe it was, just a year or two ago, where within 4 months, 50% of the search, so if you search a topic in mental health in the App Store, 50% of the results would be different within 4 months. There are 2.9 apps being deleted every day, and we've seen just an explosion in hundreds being added now pretty much every day, if not every day, then at least every week. So we can't answer Thomas's question yet, but I'm hoping that also the app stores and the platforms where we find these tools get more intelligent over time. So right now you can't search on anything besides like keywords or ratings, topics, but eventually this level of intelligence around like, okay, regional restrictions and certification levels and things like that will hopefully be built in so that the technology platforms like Apple, for example, and Google Play will have some of this built in that you can decide, okay, I want something that's more clinical. I don't want to trust just anything. Other people don't feel seriously challenged. They may be okay with something that's less clinical, but give more control and power to the user.
Definitely, and I think that Apple's going to be closer on this one. I mean, their App Store regulations are much more stringent. Many things can land on Google Play, whilst on App Store you have to go through the review process. And whilst they're focusing on privacy right now, I think very soon they also discover the responsibility of we can't allow that app in the mental health space on the App Store because it'll do more bad than it will actually help anyone. So this nicely segues into a question from Marcin. Marcin, please forgive me for rephrasing it slightly, because you ask what percentage of mental cases should be fully serviced by technology and what percentage simply needs human touch, real person behind the help. First of all, I imagine that there's a third option where you have a combination of tech and actual human input, but I'm pretty sure you can't give us the percentage down to the number. But if you could let us know when it makes sense to go for the digital and when it is absolutely essential to jump in into actually talking to another human being physically.
Well, that question has a few different answers, and I don't have specific percentages, I have to admit. But the thing that part of kind of what we're looking at as well with this personalization is that technology knows so much about you now. I mean, that's part of the problem also with social media and things, is it biases people based on what you get access to. People are different and their comfort level is different. So my first answer is going to be that whatever you're willing to use, do it. So if you need help, you're not willing or you're not comfortable talking to a person yet, then go to technology. It may or may not help you. It depends on what you're struggling with and what technology you connect to, but it's always better to do something than nothing. Then there are some people who are minorly challenged or just want to kind of air their thoughts or discuss their thinking patterns, and they right away will benefit from talking to a person. So they don't need to wait to a severity level. But if you're in treatment, technology helps augment that, in that if you meet a therapist once a week for an hour, there's still those other hours and days in between where now you can use technology that uses a similar treatment method as your practitioner. So if you have a coach or a therapist who uses certain techniques, then ask them what that is. And then if you can find the apps that use the similar technique, then you and your therapist, for example, can say like, oh, I'm going to use this in between, and then see if it reinforces what the therapist does. So like you said, Philip, it's not a black and white thing. The key is, okay, any help is better than none. But we need to, there's a lot of studies that show that virtual interventions and digital support can be as good as human support for the right challenges. But if you're really at a point where you don't know what's going on with you, you don't feel comfortable talking to anyone around you about it, like a family member or a good friend, then go to a coach or a therapist. And there are a lot now being enabled virtually through like BetterHelp and things like that, where you can connect to someone. And that may seem intimidating, but it's actually helpful because virtually then you're in your home, you're still in your safe space. They're trained professionals. You don't need to turn your video on if that's too much for you. You want to talk to someone, but you don't want to kind of be on in front of them. You can create these lower barriers for yourself to still at least talk to someone. But a big thing that holds people back from talking to other people, professionals or otherwise, is this self-stigma that we do. I'm ashamed to admit I'm not good enough or that I'm having these problems. I've been diagnosed 3 times in my life with clinical depression. I've been on medication. I've seen several therapists at different times, and some have worked for me, some haven't. But overall, knowing that they're a professional, it's their job to be supportive of you regardless of what you're coming with. So you don't need to go and present anything to them or be afraid that you're going to sound stupid or crazy. They have heard everything. There's very little you can come with that they haven't in some way understood or been prepared for. So the key thing is to don't hold yourself back out of fear or intimidation of going for help. If you need something, even if it's not serious, just give it a try. I would say it's always better to have tried to get help than to have sat there and hoped to fight through it by yourself. And this is especially for men out there. Not that women don't have the same issues, but a lot more men struggle to reach out for help, and it has a lot of unfortunate consequences.
So what I'm hearing is let digital be your gateway drug into human-to-human interaction on this space. And Marcin actually dropped in another a remark that can be very useful for developers. Please, all developers, think about this. Can an app recognize whether it can handle your case and whether it can alert you that this is not the right app for you and actually direct you to a specialist, someone who can manage this? So the next question, and we're getting really interesting ones from tech aspects to society, slightly legal right now, from Tomasz. What is the state of mental health app regulations? Whilst medical devices need certification, what comes when we're not dealing with hardware, but with software?
Yeah, so here in Europe, there's the CE marking. So there are more regulations coming that require applications to be classified as a medical device, even if it's a digital device, not a hardware device. So it is starting to come, but the lines, depending on country to country and or region, are still not aligned. North America, it is easier to come out, but it's also easy to kind of find the gray zones. So, for example, if users give you different information about what they're experiencing, then if you have to be very careful about whether you give a recommendation or not, or how you do that, and what you base that on, because in some regions that's interpreted the same as giving a prescription, because it's a medical device. Oh, well, you have this problem, you should use this. What we're trying to do, for example, right now is we don't actually want to be a clinical device. We just want to say, look, these applications have said they do what you say you're looking for in the way you like it, and we match it. But you could argue that a lot of the input information apps get, including our own, they're based on things like the DSM-5 mental health frameworks that medical professionals use, and there are more complex ones, different regional ones. It's a bit of a minefield, because what you do with that information is the question. Is it a diagnostics tool? Then yes, it should be a medical device. If it's prescription, it should be. But what if they don't actually define what you're challenged with? So I'd say there's a long way to go still for regulating it. And regulation, there's two sides of the fence about whether regulation will hurt people getting access to more relevant tools that they enjoy. As I said earlier, the better validated ones actually tend to have lower user ratings and lower user experience and kind of enjoyability. People won't use you can have the best clinically validated app, but if people don't like using it, they're not going to get a benefit out of it, because they'll stop using it before they reach it, right? So it's this whole kind of interesting space, and it's important. I think for me, I hope that regulation focuses especially on data privacy and user data privacy first, and continues then figuring out what are the lines which require what levels of regulation, and not have one regulation where it's a medical device or not, but instead have layers saying, okay, what quality, is it a clinical medical device, or is it a kind of preliminary treatment, the same way if you go to a pharmacy and you get cold medicine without a prescription versus going to a doctor and getting antibiotics. There are levels, and I hope regulators think that into how they structure it.
Makes a lot of sense. And now I've got a really cool question from Piotr. You can say Peter. And just in case we're keeping this idea, we're registering this as a trademark. You heard it here first on Disruption Talks. So there are plenty of people who have degrees from psychology, but career-wise, they don't end up as psychologists. Do you think that it's a untapped space where actually we have people with the qualifications, they're making a living in a completely different area, but could we perhaps bridge that gap of having the people with qualifications help evaluate those apps and review whether it's the right app in general and whether it's the right app for you? What do you think about it? Sounds pretty cool to me.
Yeah, it is definitely a good idea. And I will say that's a bit, I know, Philip, you want to trademark this one, but that's a bit of what Orca is doing with the health professionals, scoring and analyzing, but it's not enough. And the thing that Orca struggles with, from my perspective, is that because they're trying to tackle all health apps and they're trying to tackle the entire app store. So mental health alone, as we said, is 20,000 apps. But if you include things related to diabetes, childcare, all kinds of health, I mean, they can't do it all to a refined enough level that a user can just go to them and get that help. That's why things like Simply Broken exist, and that we're kind of making a niche out of that whole pool and digging deeper into it. But absolutely, there are people who have these kind of degrees, who have this background, this insight, should absolutely activate it. I think that in the past, you were certified to be a practitioner of medicine, of course, and you should. But now that virtual health is so key, people should really leverage that knowledge and capability, and can do it in a way that has a great positive impact on people who need that help. And technology is driving so much of behavior and access and solutions now. So like one of our advisors, Louisa, is a psychologist. She also builds apps to help support people who've been, who are recovering from having been sexually assaulted and raped, for just as a thing. And the more people with these kind of education and understanding of what it means and what it works should absolutely activate it and see it as a benefit. You should easily be hired now by a lot of tech companies as a psychologist, because there is so much you can apply from that into what the person experiences, not even for health related apps, but just app and user behavior in general, and how to make sure that what you're offering helps the people that you're trying to help.
Piotr, please reach out after the show, and hopefully we can start a platform just like that. I would like to merge two questions because they're slightly overlapping. So Michał and Victor, who already asked us a question, ask about the most impactful things on mental health. And here we've got the political situation. Social polarization, I imagine it results directly from the political situation. but also social media is mentioned. So what would you say, are those the three worst things that are impacting us outside of work stress? Uh, and any advice how to tackle that? Because we can change a job, but we probably can't change the political situation of the country we live in. We can move, but we all know that there's no safe haven when it comes to politics. Every country has its ups and downs. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because you can ask, what is the impact of these things on mental health? You can also ask, how does having mental health challenges and the way we're raising people in our identity causing political situations and polarization that we see today? Because I would argue those are almost a byproduct created of unsupported mental health in some places, maybe. It definitely impacts. One thing that's it's very well known, right, that people who follow Instagram, especially younger people, get a really skewed view of body image, and also what success and value and happiness looks like and what they should be striving for. And we know that people get endorphins when they get more likes and when they get, more shares and things like that, and followers. People have made a huge industry out of that, and people, like back in the day, people wanted to be astronauts. Now you want to be an influencer, like as a career. And I'm not saying influencers aren't working hard for it, but it skews reality in that it makes people also feel worse about their day-to-day life. So is it good enough that I get up, do my 9 to 5 job, or my cleaning work, or my teaching job, or whatever, and that's not my great life passion, but I spend 8 hours every day doing that? I should be so depressed, because how am I spending my life? But at the same time, you can read, for example, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. The key to thriving in life, and a lot of Buddhist philosophy tells you about appreciating what you have, and gratefulness and gratitude at the time. And social media, from my opinion, skews that a lot, because you're unconsciously benchmarking the things you see to what your reality is. And people, like, I don't put my ugly, crying, stressed out days up on Facebook. Like, those aren't the pictures you see. But I probably have more of those than, like, sitting at the beach with a cocktail in my hand with a sea turtle nearby or whatever. But I'll put that picture up because it's cool and I like it and I want people to see it. So you don't see probably more than 90% of people's reality when you go on social media. So either people start posting the ugly stuff and the reality of things, which is an option, and actually I think a lot of people would like it if was like, look, this is me, honestly. I had a bad day. I have like black makeup coming down my eyes, and my cat ate my, favorite hair scrunchie or something. I'd probably get a lot of likes, because people are like, yes, finally we can see that honesty out there. But it doesn't trend. It doesn't, you can't commercialize it in the same way that people have with influencers. So back to also the bias about the data we have from people, and social media. So it's not just what you see and how you interpret it, but it's also what the algorithms and the structure behind the different media types, not just social, are doing to create belief systems in people. And that's why, like, I was born and grew up in Canada, although I'm living in Denmark now, Danish parents. When you're looking at North America, and you wonder how some of the people can behave the way they are or think the things they do, you can of course always put the onus on the individual. It's not that they're not responsible for themselves, but they get so much mixed information from sources that they believe are trustworthy. And we get so much information now that we don't have the time to dig into one news story and look at all the background in it to know whether it's true or not.
Sorry, apologies.
It's okay. So it's really this, we can't keep up with all of it, so we only look at the top level, and then we have to decide, do we take this for granted as truth or not? So I think less social media, limit yourself to few trustworthy sources of information, but that cover different angles of a story, and don't play the Facebook, Instagram game of kind of looking at what other people do and posting your own life up there. Try and go a month and don't post anything about yourself, and just see how that feels. After a while, you get really relaxed about it because there's so much less out there about you. And you start to realize where else you can get these positive endorphins and good things that are less destructive to you.
So two things I wanted to respond on that is number one, when you mentioned gratefulness, I know also to answer the question, there is this exercise where for 30 days, don't quote me on this, I'm not an expert. Each evening before going to sleep, you write down three things that you're grateful for. And you do that over the course of 30 days. Maybe it goes into a habit that you just have, but make sure that you don't do things like, I'm thankful for my health, I'm thankful for this, but focus on the things that actually put a smile on your face, right? So focus on the fact that you're appreciative of the fact that you have gone to work today and everything was fine, the fact that you have jobs and you're employed and so on. So I recommend that. And point number two is, I agree, when you speak of Facebook and Instagram as the sort of harbingers of the dopamine apocalypse of likes and comparing yourself to everybody out there. But actually on TikTok, I think there's a very, very impressive trend, and a very big one, when it comes to actually popularizing sadness in some sense. If you go on TikTok and open the page that's for you, so the absolute swiping hell that takes you in there forever, you can actually see many TikToks that become popular because people sort of ridicule their problems. You could see a girl who was crying after a breakup, but she had the courage and decided to actually put it out there and discuss her issues openly, but also put a twist that makes people laugh at it. So they're relaxed to have that conversation, and also respond in the comments with things like, hey, me too. Like, I have the same issue that you just mentioned. So thank you for bringing it out there. And also, I would like us to go to the last question. I saved the best for last. So a short introduction to this, what I want to ask about. No doubt, many of you have heard about Robinhood, the online trading platform. Last year, there was a situation where everybody in the US were getting their stimulus checks, $1,200, great stuff. Some people went to Amazon, some people saved it, and some people went to Robinhood, the platform, which actually has some rather predatory UX tactics, because actually it allows you to unlock options if you tap 1,000 times into a specific button. So really this rat rewarding behavior of dopamine, right? And actually, one of the people who invested their stimulus checks, it was a 23-year-old boy, if I remember correctly. And due to the faulty UX, because he saw on his screen on a Friday and over the weekend, the app doesn't update, minus $700,000. And that wasn't a reflection of him owning $700,000 to Robinhood or any stock trading platform. It was a display of how much your balance would be negative if all of those current things that stopped over the weekend happened. So before we got to Monday, on that weekend, that man committed suicide. He simply thought, due to bad UX, that this means that I owe $700,000. So with that slightly long introduction to ground this question here, we got a question from Radek. How big is the responsibility on designers and developers when building software related to mental health issues? But I like to expand that question, not only mental health issues, but there's a responsibility everywhere when it comes to the creators of the digital tools that we use. So should such a project be managed differently? Radek says that he's guessing fake it till you make it just doesn't cut it when it comes to such serious stuff.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so the key thing here that I hope every company does, I think it's a little unfair to give everyone credit for doing that, but it's really this pre-mortem kind of perspective, this, what are the consequences of us doing X, implementing X, showing X? What are the unintended consequences? Because what a lot of companies focus on is, okay, what do we want people to do or see, or how do we want people to react? And then they design for that. But not every company kind of asks itself, okay, but if we did this, what else could happen that we don't intend? And really testing early with other people who aren't part of the team, part of the company, for example, testing with just a couple of trustworthy people to say, all right, what is the worst you could possibly think of happening in this? Well, okay, if you told me I owed 700,000 right now, I would not be in a good mental health place either and be quite panicky. It would be a huge disaster. And I think any normal person, you don't need to have mental health challenges to have that problem. One issue we also have with mental health is that people aren't thinking logically. So if you're designing without advice from clinicians, people who've studied psychology or who are practicing therapists, then you don't necessarily know what are the kind of odd thought patterns or behaviors that people can experience in relation to what you do, because you think, well, any logical human will just do this or do that or something. But I can say, when I myself have had depression in the past, there's these little blips where some little tiny thing, almost insignificant, will happen, and my brain will blow it up to being the world's worst catastrophe. And so I'm upset for a half hour, an hour at a time, and then it's like, in my case, a light switch goes off and I'm calm and I'm maybe not happy, but fine. But I can see my behavior from the last half hour to an hour, and maybe I've yelled at my partner or written some ridiculous thing online or what I've done, but I know that's not like normal logical me. It's me reacting in an uncharacteristic way due to the depression that I had. And you can't easily design for that, but you need to be super careful with any kind of thing that can trigger, exactly as you say, for example, the amount of catastrophic stress and depression someone would have. Money is one of, if not the worst stressors in life. It's one of them, right? And I mean, that is catastrophic. So we need to use professionals, and we also need to think in put more emphasis on, okay, what are the unintended consequences that could happen here, as much as what is our desired outcome. Even if you're sure you want, or even you need a behavior from a user for your solution to be a success, don't risk it if you can see that there is a chance that these other negative consequences can happen.
And I think that's a wrap. I think that was a great way to finish off this almost hour mark that we are hitting right now. So, Anneli, thank you for your time. Thank you for the knowledge, but most importantly, thank you for the honesty of sharing your own story, because I think that steps the conversation outside of statistics, reports by Accenture, or whatnot. We have actually a human being and a human story that supports all of this. So I guess it wouldn't be too much to say that anybody who's watching right now or will watch in the future, feel free to reach out to Anneli and Simply Broken to discuss anything you might want to discuss. Whilst in the meantime, thank you so much for watching, dear audience, and hopefully we will see you on the next episode. Thank you, Anneli.
Thanks, Philip. Thanks, everyone.